Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Brewer's Minute. So this week, we're going to take a few minutes to talk about a card that I am very confident is the most important and very possibly the best card from Aether Revolt. This card is the most important because it is hugely impactful in multiple formats and does a ton of really good key things in Modern and in Standard and probably in Legacy as well. So if you look at Modern, there are two removal spells that really keep the format in check, and they are the two most played cards in the entire format, Lightning Bolt and Path to Exile, and these cards are super key because the Modern format is blazingly fast. If you look at Modern, there are so many decks that are looking to play really aggressive early game creatures, kill you really quickly. You got Death Shadow, you got Blighted Agents out of Infect, Goblin Guides, Vault Scourges, so there's so many fast decks that if you're going to be a mid-range deck or a more controlling deck, you really need to have answers starting on turn one, and they have to be efficient and they have to be able to take care of a wide range of threats. So that's an important part of Modern, and so far in Modern, we have Path, we have Bolt, those are good in white and in red, but black has kind of been missing a premier removal spell, which is weird because black is, in my mind at least, one of, if not the color of removal. Well, with Aether Revolt, we have the black version of Lightning Bolt, of Path to Exile. Fatal Push is the best removal spell Wizards has printed since Dismember for sure, and the reason Dismember is good is because it breaks the color pie, so discounting the color pie breaking aspects of Dismember, Fatal Push is the best removal spell they've printed since Path to Exile. This card is amazingly good. Just instant speed, destroys a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, and it has Revolt, which means if a permanent left your battlefield this turn, it triggers, and then it kills a creature with converted mana cost 4 or less. Of course, in Modern, you have fetch lands, so you can assume that in a huge percentage of decks, you're going to be able to trigger Revolt whenever you want to. It's not much of a cost to have something leave the battlefield. Even beyond fetch lands, things die and get sacrificed and get flickered, so there's ways to do it, but the easiest one is just fetch land, crack a fetch land, you can kill something with converted mana cost 4 or less, which is a huge deal. So the comparison with Fatal Push is Dismember, and as I mentioned before, Dismember is primarily good because it breaks the color pie, but really, it's the best black removal spell in the format. It's even better in black decks because you don't always have to pay the life. So when I first saw Fatal Push, my initial reaction was, this just immediately replaces Dismember in any black deck I'm playing in Modern. Like I said, if you're mono blue, you gotta go with Dismember because you gotta be able to cast it for Phyrexian mana, but if you're playing black, I think Fatal Push just immediately gets rid of Dismember, and a lot of people said they didn't think that was true. They thought that Dismember was still better, maybe Fatal Push takes a spot of Disfigure or something, but let's look at the Modern format and see just how good Fatal Push is compared to Dismember. So, like I mentioned before, we're running under the assumption that with Fatal Push, you're going to be able to have a fetch land around when you need it to crack and trigger Revolt, so we're assuming that in a huge percentage of cases, you're going to be able to kill something with converted mana cost 4 or less. So if we look at the 50 most played creatures in Modern, the 50 most played covers pretty much every staple and even pseudo-staple in the format. You'll see that there are 3 cards on the list that Dismember kills that Fatal Push doesn't kill. And those cards are Reality Smasher and Drowner of Hope, which are fairly popular from the Eldrazi deck, and then Tasigur the Golden Fangs, he's playing Delver, in a lot of decks actually, but usually as a one-of. So there's 3 cards making up a relatively small percentage of the format where you really want Dismember because Fatal Push is never going to be able to kill them. And you might think that it's all downside with Fatal Push, but it's really not, because there's 2 big things that Fatal Push does. First, on turn 1, it is so good. We talked a little bit in the intro about how fast the Modern format is, and there are times when you have to turn 1 Dismember a Goblin Guide, and it is really painful. Yes, you know that that Goblin Guide is probably going to deal 4 or 6 damage to you if you don't kill it, so you're kind of forced to pay that 4 life to cast your Dismember for 1 mana, but With Fatal Push, you can do this for free, essentially. You pay your 1 mana, it's not costing you any life, and against a deck like Burn or Death Shadow, not hitting yourself for 4 damage on turn 1 could very easily be the difference between winning or losing the game. So that's the biggest upside of Fatal Push. Even though Dismember can kill these creatures on turn 1, you're way better off killing it with Fatal Push because you don't have to lose that life. However, there's even some creatures that Fatal Push is just better at killing. And it's not in every scenario, but there's been plenty of times playing Affinity or playing against Death Shadow where my Dismember just can't get the job done. Because your opponent has a bunch of artifacts they can sack and make Ravager huge, Death Shadow has 8 power and toughness or something, and Dismember just doesn't do it. Fatal Push, because it's based on converted mana cost rather than power and toughness, kills those cards no matter what. Your opponent's Death Shadow can be a 12-12, or it can be a 20-20 after a Become Immense or whatever, and Fatal Push is still going to get it done. Your opponent can sack their entire board to Ravager, Fatal Push is still going to kill it. So there are some big benefits to Fatal Push as well, so I think when you look at it, the upside of Fatal Push, not losing life, being able to kill Ravagers and Death Shadows at all times, very much outweighs the upside of Dismember. So I think if I'm playing a normal black deck, Jund, Abzan, anything that has black mana and wants a removal spell, I will immediately replace any copies of Dismember I have with Fatal Push, and I think there's even an argument to replace other removal with it. Like, this could be fighting with Abrupt Decay's 4 slots, because Abrupt Decay doesn't hit creature lands, for example. It costs 2 mana. If you're considering Victim of Night in a deck, this could be in that slot as well, or Doomblade, or Go for the Throat. This is really fighting with those cards, and probably beating those cards as the best black removal spell in the format. Of course, there are exceptions. If you're playing a deck that doesn't have any fetch lands, let's say the mono black Devotion deck or something weird like that, maybe 8-rack, then you have an argument where Fatal Push probably isn't where you want to be, and you probably want Dismember, because if Fatal Push is only killing things with converted mana cost 2 or less, which in a fetch land deck, I'm not even considering that a possibility. You should have a fetch to be able to trigger it. On the other hand, in a deck without fetch lands, it does look more like Disfigure, and I think you will play Fatal Push over Disfigure because it kills everything Disfigure does and then some. Beyond Modern, Fatal Push is also the savior of Standard to some extent because it is an answer to Smuggler's Copter. Last time I looked at the numbers, 62% of Standard decks were playing Smuggler's Copter as a 4-of. That means more than half of the decks in Standard are playing Fatal Push, are playing Smuggler's Copter, 4 copies in their deck. Fatal Push instantly becomes the best, most efficient, cleanest answer to Smuggler's Copter in the format. And when 62% of decks are playing it, it is definitely worthy of a main deck slot because you are fighting the premier card in the format for 1 mana, and that's actually a trade that gains you mana. One of the problems with Smuggler's Copter is the best answers previously, Harness Lightning for example, are costing you more mana or an equal amount of mana than Smuggler's Copter. It doesn't feel good to murder a Smuggler's Copter. You're losing mana in that exchange, and even though you get it off the battlefield and you gotta do it, it's not a way to win games. But Fatal Push changes that equation. You're actually netting a mana in the exchange of killing Smuggler's Copter, which is a huge deal. But even beyond Smuggler's Copter, you have Grimflayer and Thing in the Ice, and here in Standard, we're running off the assumption that you're only killing things with converted mana cost 2 or less. There will be times when you can get into combat, one of your things dies, and you can trigger it for 4 or less and hit a Kalitas or something, but even just assuming it's always cast without Revolt, just killing something with converted mana cost 2 or less, the card is still very strong. Smuggler's Copter, Grimflayer, Thing in the Ice means it's live against a lot of control decks, which are using Thing in the Ice. It even kills Thing in the Ice once Thing in the Ice flips around because the converted mana cost remains the same, and then it wipes out pretty much everything in various human lists, a lot of the green-red energy list. Doesn't hit everything, but it hits a lot. And Veteran Motorist, many of the cards in the Mardu or red-white vehicles decks, so there's a lot of utility at killing non-Smuggler's Copter creatures for just 1 mana, even without the Revolt ability. So the bottom line is this. Fatal Push is easily the most important card in Aether Revolt. It is going to greatly change standards. It's a reason to play black, a reason to not play Smuggler's Copter. It does so much for the format. And in Modern, this is on par with Lightning Bolt, with Path to Exile, the premier removal spells that are the most played cards in the format. Fatal Push is in the same league, in that same conversation, and I would not be at all surprised if, when we are looking back on this card 6 months in the future, this is among the top 10 most played cards in Modern. There's no reason to play Disfigure anymore in any format because you just play this, and I think it'll even see more play than that because it is close to Lightning Bolt and Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile as the greatest removal spells ever printed. So I'm super excited for this card, not so much because it's an exciting card. It is, in the sense that it's really important for tournament formats, but it's not flashy, it doesn't win you the game or do anything crazy, but it's going to help fight the unfair fast stacks of Modern, which is great. That is something that we want, is Modern to slow down a bit. This is a card that can help do that, and it's also going to help fight against Smuggler's Copter, which is one of the most dominating cards in Standard. So all around, I'm really excited for this card because it's a great thing for Magic in multiple formats that I love. So I think Fatal Push is going to be a good thing. Going to see a ton of play, so pick up your playset now because you're going to want to be running this in essentially every format you play. Anyway, that's been our Brewers Minute for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.